Amina never imagined her life could change so drastically. One moment, she was a devoted daughter in a humble town. The next, she was standing at the crossroads of a decision that would alter everything she knew. Her days were filled with small joys and silent struggles. She helped her father run a modest vegetable shop, sharing smiles with the townsfolk who adored her kind nature. But beneath her quiet demeanor was a heart longing for something more, something that went beyond the simple routines of her small world. She had dreams, big dreams, but they were fragile, like whispers carried away by the wind. She wanted a life where love wasn't just a word, but a bond that gave her the strength to face any storm. Amina often wondered if anyone could see beyond her calm exterior and truly understand her, the hopes, the fears, the silent battles she fought every day. Her beauty wasn't loud or demanding. It was in her gentle smile, the kindness in her eyes, and the way she brought warmth to every room she entered. People often said she deserved more than the life her family's circumstances allowed, but Amina had learned to make peace with her reality. At least, she thought she had. One ordinary day, everything changed. It wasn't the kind of change you plan for. It was the kind that blindsides you, shakes your world, and makes you question everything. A stranger walked into her life, offering her something she never thought she'd have, a chance at love, adventure, and a life she could only dream of. The offer seemed almost too good to be true, and perhaps it was. But in that moment, Amina felt the pull of destiny, daring her to take a leap of faith. What she didn't know was that this decision would lead her down a path filled with secrets, heartbreak, and choices she never imagined she'd have to make. Amina had no idea that her simple, quiet life was about to unravel, pulling her into a story far more complicated and far more dangerous than she ever expected. He entered her life like a storm, unexpected, captivating, and impossible to ignore. Amina first saw him at a family gathering, his confident demeanor drawing attention from everyone in the room. Khalid was unlike anyone she had ever met. He spoke with a charm that seemed effortless, his words carefully chosen to disarm even the most skeptical hearts. At first, she hesitated. How could someone like him, with his polished manners and sophisticated air, even notice someone like her? But Khalid had a way of making people feel special, and with Amina he went further. He listened intently when she spoke, his eyes never leaving hers, as though she was the only person in the world. His interest felt genuine, and for the first time in her life, Amina felt truly seen. He wasn't just handsome, he was thoughtful too. Khalid would bring her small, unexpected gifts, a flower from the garden, a book he thought she might enjoy, or even a handwritten note with words that touched her heart. He spoke of building a life together, of dreams that aligned with hers. He promised her the kind of love she had only read about in stories, the kind that could transform an ordinary life into something extraordinary. Amina couldn't help but be swept away. Khalid seemed to be everything she had ever hoped for, someone who understood her dreams and shared her vision for the future. The way he looked at her, the way he made her laugh, and the way he spoke of a shared life filled her heart with a hope she hadn't dared to feel before. But there were moments, fleeting and easy to dismiss, where a shadow crossed his face, a hesitation in his words, a flicker of something hidden in his otherwise warm gaze. Amina noticed, but convinced herself it was nothing. After all, everyone has their secrets, don't they? When Khalid proposed, it felt like a dream. His words were simple, yet powerful. "I want to give you the life you deserve, Amina. A life where your dreams aren't just dreams, they're reality." How could she say no? How could she resist the pull of a man who made her believe that anything was possible? In that moment, she said yes, not knowing that the path she had chosen would lead her into a world far more complex than she could have ever imagined. Amina believed she was stepping into a fairy tale, but the reality waiting for her was something else entirely. At first, their married life felt like a dream come true. Khalid kept his promises, surrounding Amina with the kind of love and comfort she had only imagined. Their home was beautiful, filled with laughter and warmth. Khalid would often surprise her with thoughtful gestures, a favorite dish prepared by the chef, an unexpected weekend getaway, or simply holding her hand as they shared quiet evenings together. Amina found herself falling deeper in love with him. She admired his confidence, his ability to handle challenges effortlessly, and the way he seemed to prioritize her above everything else. For a while, it seemed like the fairy tale was real, and Amina's life was as perfect as she had always hoped it would be. But as the weeks turned into months, small cracks began to appear in the foundation of their happiness. At first, they were so subtle that Amina barely noticed them. Khalid's work kept him away longer than expected, and his once thoughtful explanations about his absences grew shorter and more vague. She started to feel a shift in his demeanor, moments where his warmth seemed to fade, replaced by a distance she couldn't quite understand. He would smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. His laughter felt forced, his gestures less spontaneous. Amina tried to convince herself that it was nothing, that every relationship went through phases, but deep down, unease began to creep into her heart. One evening, as they sat together in their spacious living room, Amina asked about his long hours. "Is everything okay at work?" she inquired gently. Khalid's response was quick, almost dismissive. "It's nothing to worry about, just some projects that need my attention." His tone was calm, but there was a finality in his words that made her hesitate to ask further. The staff in their home, once warm and chatty, began to seem unusually reserved around her. When Amina walked into a room, conversations would abruptly stop, and she often caught fleeting glances exchanged between them. It was subtle, but enough to make her wonder if there was something they knew that she didn't. Despite these small signs, Amina held on to the hope that things would return to the way they were in the beginning. She loved Khalid deeply and believed in their bond. But in her quiet moments, sitting alone in the home they had built together, Amina couldn't shake the feeling that her perfect world was beginning to shift. What she didn't know was that this was just the beginning. The life she had thought was her dream was starting to show its shadows, and the secrets hidden beneath the surface were waiting to reveal themselves. It started with the smallest of things, moments Amina could easily dismiss if she tried hard enough. Khalid had always been attentive, but now there were gaps in his presence, both physical and emotional. He would come home late, his once warm and detailed stories about his day replaced with vague excuses. "Meetings ran over," he would say, or "there's just so much to handle right now." At first, Amina accepted these explanations without question. After all, Khalid was a hard-working man. But then the phone calls began. Quiet, hushed conversations late at night. Amina would wake to the sound of Khalid's low voice from the study, his words too muffled to make out. Whenever she asked who he had been talking to, his answer was the same. "Just work. Go back to sleep." She wanted to believe him, she truly did. But the unease in her heart grew with each passing day. Khalid, who had once shared everything with her, now seemed to be hiding behind a carefully constructed wall. His phone, which used to sit casually on the coffee table, was now always in his pocket or face down on the counter. The passcode had changed, though he never mentioned it. Amina began to notice other things too, small details that whispered of something unspoken. The faint smell of unfamiliar perfume on his jacket, receipts from restaurants she had never visited, and the way he would avoid her gaze when she asked if something was wrong. "You're imagining things," Khalid would say with a reassuring smile. "You know how much I care about you. Don't let little things bother you." But it wasn't just little things anymore. There was a distance between them now, a quiet void that grew wider with every unexplained absence. He would leave early in the mornings, returning long after dinner, often distracted and distant. Amina found herself sitting alone at the dining table, staring at the empty seat across from her, wondering where he really was. One night, as she lay awake in bed, she heard his phone buzz on the nightstand. It was a message, one he clearly didn't want her to see, because he quickly grabbed the phone and turned it off. "It's just a client," he muttered when he saw her watching. "Nothing important."
His tone was calm, but his actions said otherwise. Amina's heart ached with confusion. She didn't want to doubt him. She loved him too much for that. But the man she had married, the man who had once made her feel like the center of his world, was slipping away, and she had no idea why.
In the quiet moments when Khalid wasn't home, Amina's mind raced with questions. Was it stress from work? Was she doing something wrong? Or was there something he wasn't telling her? She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Khalid's behavior than he was letting on. Little did she know, the answers she sought were far more complicated and far more painful than she could have ever imagined. The unsettling feeling in Amina's heart grew stronger as the days went by. It wasn't just Khalid's late nights or distant demeanor. It was the small, almost imperceptible changes that she couldn't ignore anymore. She began to notice things that didn't quite fit, pieces of a puzzle she didn't yet have the picture for. One afternoon, while tidying the house, Amina found a receipt crumpled in the pocket of Khalid's jacket. It was for an upscale restaurant in the city, a place they had never been together. Her fingers trembled as she stared at the date and time. It was from an evening Khalid had told her he was working late. She brushed it off as a work meeting, but a seed of doubt had already been planted. The next clue came when she accidentally opened the wrong drawer in his study. She was looking for a pen, but instead found an envelope stuffed with papers. They were property documents, deeds for a house she had never heard of, in a neighborhood she didn't recognize. Her breath hitched as she scanned the papers, her mind racing with questions. Why hadn't Khalid mentioned this? What was this house, and why was it kept from her? Things took a darker turn when she noticed his frequent absences coinciding with phone calls he would step outside to take. She would watch him through the window, pacing the garden, his voice low and urgent. He always came back with an excuse, but the excuses were starting to sound rehearsed. "It's work," he'd say, or "a client needed advice." Yet, the look in his eyes told her there was more he wasn't saying. One evening, while cleaning the living room, she picked up Khalid's laptop to dust underneath it. The screen lit up, revealing an email notification. Her eyes lingered on the subject line. "Looking forward to seeing you again." She froze, staring at the sender's name, a name she didn't recognize. Her pulse quickened as she placed the laptop back down, her mind spiraling with thoughts she didn't want to believe. But the most telling clue came late one night. Khalid had left for yet another business dinner, and Amina, unable to sleep, found herself in his study again. This time she noticed a small leather notebook tucked away behind a stack of files. She hesitated, then opened it, her hands shaking. Inside were notes, addresses, and dates, none of which made sense to her. But one entry stood out, a recurring name paired with a phone number. It wasn't hers. Amina closed the notebook, her heart pounding. She tried to make sense of it all, the hidden documents, the cryptic messages, the secretive behavior. Her instincts told her something was terribly wrong, but she wasn't ready to confront Khalid. Not yet. She needed more answers, more clarity, before she could face him with the storm of questions building inside her. The clues were there, scattered like breadcrumbs, leading to a truth she wasn't sure she was ready to uncover. But Amina knew one thing for certain. Whatever Khalid was hiding, it was only a matter of time before it came to light. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same again. Amina's mind was no longer at ease. The scattered clues she had uncovered were no longer isolated incidents. They were threads leading to something far bigger, something she could feel lurking just out of reach. Each new discovery added weight to her suspicions, and the once innocent trust she had in Khalid began to crumble under the pressure of unanswered questions. Late one evening, Khalid returned home smelling of cologne that wasn't his usual. Amina noticed it immediately. It was subtle, floral, and distinctly feminine. She didn't say anything, but her heart sank. When she asked casually about his evening, his response was curt and devoid of detail. "Just another meeting," he said, avoiding her gaze. But Amina had heard enough vague excuses to know when he was holding something back. Her doubts grew stronger when she started noticing patterns in his behavior. He seemed to have specific days when he was unusually secretive, leaving the house early and returning late with a distracted air. Even when he was home, he was often glued to his phone, typing away with a seriousness that only deepened her unease. Every time she asked about his work, his answers grew more evasive. "It's nothing important," he would insist. But his tone carried an edge that told her not to push further. One day, while Khalid was out, Amina decided to look for the leather notebook she had found earlier. She had hidden it in her wardrobe, afraid of leaving it in the study where he might notice it missing. As she flipped through its pages again, the same recurring name stood out. A name she didn't recognize, paired with different dates and locations. Her eyes lingered on one particular entry, a recent date marked with a single word: dinner. Her thoughts raced. Who was this person, and why was Khalid meeting them so frequently? The evidence was mounting, but it wasn't enough to confront him. Not yet. Amina needed to be certain before she accused him of anything. The breaking point came a week later. Khalid had left the house in a rush, claiming he had an urgent business meeting. Amina watched from the window as he drove away, her mind clouded with doubt. On a whim, she decided to call his office. The receptionist's polite voice greeted her, and Amina hesitantly asked, "Is Khalid in a meeting right now?" There was a pause on the other end before the receptionist replied, "No, ma'am. He hasn't been in the office all day." Amina felt the blood drain from her face. She managed to thank the receptionist and hung up, her hands trembling. For the first time, the doubts swirling in her mind crystallized into a horrifying possibility. Khalid wasn't just keeping secrets. He was living a life she knew nothing about. From that moment, Amina couldn't shake the feeling that her entire world was about to unravel. She began piecing together every odd detail, every vague excuse, and every hidden clue. The receipts, the emails, the late nights, it all painted a picture she didn't want to believe but could no longer ignore. The once innocent trust she had in her husband had turned into a gnawing suspicion that consumed her thoughts. The man she had married, the man who had promised her a life of love and partnership, now seemed like a stranger hiding behind a carefully constructed facade. Amina knew that the truth was close, just within her grasp. But as her doubts turned into certainty, one question haunted her. When she finally uncovered the truth, would she be strong enough to face it? Amina couldn't take it anymore. The unanswered questions, the mounting suspicion, and Khalid's constant evasiveness had pushed her to the edge. She decided that she couldn't wait for the truth to come to her. She had to find it herself, and when she did, it changed everything. One evening, after Khalid left for another so-called business meeting, Amina's resolve hardened. She remembered the notebook she had hidden, the mysterious name that had been haunting her thoughts. This time, she decided to take a step she had been hesitant to take before. She picked up her phone and dialed the number listed next to the recurring name. Her heart pounded as the line rang. Part of her hoped no one would answer, but that hope was short-lived. A woman's voice, warm and unsuspecting, greeted her. "Hello?" Amina froze, her voice caught in her throat. She hadn't planned what to say. Finally, she forced herself to speak. "Hello? I'm sorry to disturb you, but I found your number in something of my husband's. I was just wondering, do you know Khalid?" The silence on the other end was deafening. Amina could almost hear the woman's breathing quicken. And then the response came, hesitant but clear. "Khalid? Yes, I know him. He's my husband." Amina felt the world shift beneath her feet. She clutched the edge of the table to steady herself, her mind racing. "Your husband," she whispered, disbelief thick in her voice. "That can't be. I'm his wife." The woman on the other end let out a soft, bitter laugh, one filled with equal parts anger and sadness. "I don't know who you are, but you must be mistaken. I've been married to Khalid for over 3 years. We have 2 children together." The words hit Amina like a physical blow. 2 children? Married for 3 years? How could this be possible? She wanted to believe it was some kind of sick joke, but deep down she knew the woman was telling the truth. The conversation ended in a flurry of accusations and denials, but Amina couldn't focus on the words anymore. Her mind was spinning with the weight of what she had just discovered. Khalid, the man she had trusted with her heart, her life, had been living a double life. He had another family, a hidden family he had never mentioned, not even in passing. When Khalid returned home later that night, Amina was waiting for him, her face pale but determined. He stepped through the door, his usual charm on full display as he greeted her. But the moment he saw her expression, his smile faltered. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice cautious. Amina didn't answer right away. She held up the notebook, her hand trembling. "I called her," she said quietly, her voice laced with pain. "The woman whose name is in this. She says she's your wife. She says you have children together." Khalid froze, the color draining from his face. For the first time since Amina had known him, he looked completely at a loss. "Amina," he began, his voice low. "Let me explain." But she wasn't interested in his explanations. Not now. "How long?" she demanded, her voice rising. "How long have you been lying to me? How long have you been living this double life?" Khalid ran a hand through his hair, his usual composure shattered. "It's not what you think," he said, but Amina cut him off. "Not what I think," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You've been married to another woman, Khalid. You have children with her, and all this time you made me believe I was the only one. How could you do this to me?" The conversation spiraled into chaos, with Khalid struggling to defend himself while Amina demanded answers. Every word he spoke only deepened her sense of betrayal. He admitted to everything. The other marriage, the children, the lies. His reasoning was weak, his excuses hollow. He claimed he never meant to hurt her, that he had always cared for her, but his words only added fuel to the fire. Amina's world had been turned upside down. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted, had built their relationship on a foundation of lies. And now, as she stood there staring at the stranger she thought she knew, she realized that nothing would ever be the same again. Amina sat on the edge of the bed they once shared, her hands trembling as she clutched the notebook that had shattered her world. The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in as the weight of Khalid's betrayal pressed down on her chest. She replayed the woman's words over and over in her mind. "We've been married for 3 years. We have 2 children together." Each syllable felt like a knife, cutting deeper into her already broken heart. Tears streamed down her face, but she couldn't bring herself to wipe them away. She stared at the photos on the bedside table. Their wedding day, a moment she had thought was the beginning of a beautiful life together. The smiles in those photos now felt like a cruel joke, a mockery of the love she had once believed in. Khalid stood in the doorway, silent and uneasy, his usual confidence completely stripped away. He had tried to explain, to offer excuses, but Amina had shut him down every time. Now the silence between them was deafening, filled with unspoken words and unbearable tension. "How could you do this to me?" Her voice was barely a whisper, yet it carried the full weight of her pain. She finally looked up at him, her tear-streaked face filled with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "How could you stand there and tell me you loved me, knowing all along that you were lying?" Khalid shifted uncomfortably, his gaze falling to the floor. "I never wanted to hurt you, Amina," he said softly. "Don't," she interrupted, her voice trembling with rage. "Don't say you didn't want to hurt me. You've destroyed me, Khalid. Everything I thought we had, everything I believed in, it was all a lie." He took a hesitant step forward, but she held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "I gave you everything," she continued, her voice breaking. "I trusted you with my heart, my life, and you repaid me with lies." Her hands clenched into fists as she fought to control the storm of emotions raging inside her. The betrayal wasn't just about the other family. It was about everything Khalid had taken from her, the trust, the love, the dreams of a future they had built together. Now, all of it lay in ruins. "I've been living in a fantasy," she said bitterly, her voice laced with sorrow. "While you've been living a double life, I've been here, believing in us, thinking we were building something real. How could you let me believe that? Khalid finally found the courage to speak. Amina, I do love you, he said, his voice desperate. You mean everything to me. It's complicated. Complicated, she repeated, her voice rising. You think this is complicated? You've lied to me about everything, Khalid. You have another wife, children, an entire life I knew nothing about, and you expect me to understand, to forgive you? Her words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Khalid didn't respond. He couldn't. There was nothing he could say to undo the damage he had done, no way to erase the pain he had caused. Amina rose from the bed, her legs unsteady, but her resolve firm. I need time, she said quietly, her voice barely audible. I need to figure out who I am without you, without these lies. I can't be in the same house as you right now. As he left the room, Amina sank back onto the bed, her body racked with sobs. She had never felt so lost, so betrayed, so completely undone. Her world had been built around Khalid, and now it was crumbling beneath her feet. But even in the depths of her despair, a small voice in the back of her mind reminded her that she was stronger than she realized. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she would have to find herself again. For now, though, all she could do was cry. Cry for the love she thought she had, for the dreams that had been shattered, and for the life she would now have to rebuild from the ashes of her broken heart. Amina had spent the night pacing the confines of her room, her mind replaying every lie, every half-truth Khalid had told her. The hurt was now mingled with a simmering rage, a fire that refused to be extinguished. She knew she couldn't stay silent anymore. The moment Khalid walked through the door that evening, she was ready to confront him. He entered with his usual air of calm, setting his briefcase down as if it were just another ordinary day. But the moment he looked at her, standing in the middle of the room with tears streaking her face and her fists clenched at her sides, he knew something was different. Amina, he began, his voice cautious. What's wrong? What's wrong? She repeated, her voice trembling with barely restrained fury. You have the nerve to ask me that, Khalid? Khalid froze, his gaze darting to her clenched fists, the fire in her eyes. Amina, please. No, she interrupted, her voice rising. No more lies, no more excuses. I want the truth, Khalid, all of it. Who is she? Who is the woman you've been hiding? And don't you dare tell me it's complicated. His jaw tightened, his carefully constructed mask beginning to crack. Amina, you don't understand? Then make me understand, she shouted, stepping closer. You owe me that much, Khalid. After everything I've sacrificed, after trusting you with my entire life, you owe me the truth. Khalid's shoulders slumped, and for a moment he looked as though he might crumble under the weight of her words. But then his expression hardened. You want the truth? He said, his voice cold. Fine. Yes, I have another wife. Yes, I have children with her. But it's not what you think. Amina let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh and filled with pain. Not what I think. Do you even hear yourself, Khalid? You've been living a double life, lying to me every single day, and you expect me to believe it's not what I think? He took a step closer, his tone growing defensive. I didn't mean for it to happen this way. I never wanted to hurt you, Amina. But there are things you don't know, things I couldn't tell you. Things you couldn't tell me? She repeated, her voice trembling. I'm your wife, Khalid. I deserve to know the truth. Instead, you chose to keep me in the dark, to let me believe in a life that was never real. Khalid ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. I didn't know how to tell you, he admitted. I thought I could keep the two lives separate, that I could protect you from... Protect me? Amina's voice cut through his excuses like a blade. You weren't protecting me, Khalid. You were protecting yourself. You were protecting your lies, your secrets, your perfect little facade. Don't you dare act like this was for my benefit. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words seemed to fail him. Amina's anger only grew, the pain and betrayal fueling every word. You stood in front of me on our wedding day, and made promises you had no intention of keeping. You looked me in the eye and told me you loved me. Was that a lie too, Khalid? Was any of it real? His silence was answer enough. Amina's voice cracked as she continued, the tears she had been holding back finally spilling over. You didn't just betray me, you destroyed everything we built together. And for what? So you could live two lives, juggle two families? Did you think I would never find out? Khalid finally looked up, his face etched with regret. I made mistakes, he said quietly. I never wanted it to come to this. Mistakes, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. This isn't a mistake, Khalid. This is who you are, and I don't even know who that is anymore. The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Khalid took a step back, his shoulders sagging as the realization of what he had done sank in. Amina stared at him, her chest heaving with the effort of holding herself together. This isn't over, she said finally, her voice steady, despite the tears streaming down her face. Not until I get the answers I deserve. With that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving Khalid standing alone, the walls of his carefully constructed life beginning to crumble around him. Khalid stood in the dimly lit room, his expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. He had never been in a situation where his carefully constructed life was laid bare, and now, under Amina's piercing gaze, he struggled to find the right words. His usual charm, the same charisma that had won Amina's heart, was nowhere to be found. All that remained was a man desperately trying to explain the unexplainable. Amina, listen to me, he began, his voice steady but tinged with desperation. I know I've hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But you have to understand, it's not as simple as you think. She scoffed, crossing her arms as she stood her ground. Not as simple as I think? Khalid, you lied to me. You built this entire relationship on lies. How is that anything but simple? You chose this. Khalid ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. I didn't choose this, he said sharply, then softened his tone. At least not in the way you think. When I met you, Amina, I wasn't looking for another life. I wasn't planning to fall for you. Fall for me? She repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. Is that supposed to justify what you've done? Is that supposed to make this better? No, he admitted quietly. It doesn't. But you need to know that my feelings for you were never a lie. I love you, Amina. I still do. The words hung in the air, but they didn't land the way Khalid had hoped. Amina's eyes filled with tears, but her expression remained hard. Love? She whispered, her voice trembling. If this is what love looks like, I don't want it. Khalid took a step toward her, his hands outstretched as if to close the emotional distance between them. I didn't know how to tell you, he said, his voice pleading. I was afraid of losing you. You brought light into my life in a way I never thought was possible. I couldn't let that go. Amina shook her head, her frustration bubbling over. So instead, you decided to keep me in the dark, to lie to me every single day? You didn't protect me, Khalid. You protected yourself. His jaw tightened, and for a moment the guilt in his eyes was replaced with defensiveness. You think this was easy for me? He said, his voice rising slightly. Do you think I wanted to live like this? Juggling two lives, carrying this secret every day? I was trying to keep everyone happy, Amina. I was trying to make it work. By lying to everyone? She shot back, her anger flaring. You didn't just lie to me, Khalid. You lied to her too. You've been living a lie, and for what? So you could have it all? That's not love. That's selfishness. Khalid's face fell, and he turned away, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. You don't understand, he muttered. It's not just about you or her. There are things you don't know, things I couldn't tell you. Then tell me now, she demanded, her voice firm despite the tears streaming down her face. No more excuses, Khalid, no more secrets. I deserve the truth. He hesitated, the weight of her words pressing down on him. Finally, he turned to face her, his eyes filled with a mix of regret and vulnerability. I didn't want to lose my family, he admitted. Either of them. When I met you, I was already in a marriage that wasn't fulfilling. I thought I could start fresh, build something new with you, but I didn't know how to let go of what I already had. So I tried to keep both. The confession hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and suffocating. Amina stared at him, her heart breaking all over again. You didn't want to lose your family, she repeated bitterly. But in trying to hold on to everything, you've lost me, Khalid. You've lost the one thing you claim to care about the most. Khalid's shoulders slumped, the full weight of his actions crashing down on him. I never meant for it to come to this, he said quietly. I thought I could make it work. You thought wrong, Amina said, her voice cold and final. You've destroyed everything we had, Khalid, and I don't know if I can ever forgive you. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Khalid lowered his head, the realization of what he had done finally sinking in. For the first time, he had no defense, no excuses, no way to fix what he had broken. And as Amina turned and walked away, the only sound left was the echo of her footsteps, leaving him alone with the wreckage of his choices. Amina sat in the quiet of her room, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. She had spent days replaying Khalid's lies and excuses, questioning every moment they had shared. But now, she was done waiting for the truth to come to her. If Khalid wasn't going to give her answers, she would find them herself. It was time to take control. With trembling hands, she picked up the notebook Khalid had so carelessly left behind. The name and phone number of the other woman, the one Khalid had kept hidden, stared back at her like a challenge. This time, there would be no hesitation. Amina dialed the number again, her heart racing as the line connected. The woman's voice, familiar from their last conversation, answered cautiously. Hello? Amina took a deep breath. It's me again. I'm not here to argue. I need to meet you. Please. There was a long pause before the woman finally agreed, her voice tinged with curiosity and apprehension. They arranged to meet at a quiet cafe in the city, a neutral ground where both could speak freely. Amina wasn't sure what she would say or how the meeting would unfold, but she knew this was the only way forward. The next day, Amina arrived at the cafe early, her nerves frayed, but her determination unshaken. She watched the door anxiously until the woman walked in, a striking figure with a calm confidence that immediately told Amina why Khalid had been drawn to her. Their eyes met, and for a moment there was nothing but silence between them. Then the woman approached, her expression guarded but curious. "You're Amina," the woman said as she sat down, her voice steady but laced with suspicion. "And you're Mariam," Amina replied, her tone equally measured. "We have a lot to talk about." The conversation began awkwardly, both women testing the waters with careful words. But as Amina revealed the truth about her relationship with Khalid, Mariam's expression shifted from disbelief to anger. "He told me he was working late," Mariam said bitterly. "All those nights he was with you, I was home taking care of our children, wondering why he was distant." Amina's heart sank. She had imagined this moment over and over, but hearing the pain in Mariam's voice made it all the more real. "I didn't know," Amina said quietly. "He lied to both of us. I thought I was the only one." Mariam shook her head, her hands clenching into fists. "I can't believe I trusted him. All these years he's been living a double life, and I was blind to it." The conversation turned into a catharsis for both women, each sharing their experiences and uncovering the depth of Khalid's deceit. For the first time, Amina felt a strange sense of solidarity. She and Mariam were both victims of the same man's lies, and together they began to piece together the full extent of his betrayal. Then Mariam said something that took Amina by surprise. "We need to confront him, together." The idea was bold, almost reckless, but Amina nodded. "He needs to face what he's done. No more hiding." The two women made a plan to confront Khalid. They would not give him the chance to manipulate or evade the truth any longer. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming their dignity and holding him accountable. As Amina left the cafe that day, she felt a flicker of strength she hadn't felt in weeks. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore, and for the first time she believed she had the power to take her life back. What came next would be Khalid's reckoning, and Amina was ready for it. Khalid returned home late that evening, expecting the quiet solitude he had grown accustomed to. He loosened his tie and stepped into the living room, but the sight before him stopped him in his tracks. Amina was sitting on the couch, her expression calm but unyielding. Beside her sat Mariam, her face a mirror of controlled fury. The air in the room was heavy, suffused with an intensity that made Khalid's chest tighten. "What's going on?" he asked cautiously, his voice betraying the unease he tried to hide. Amina stood slowly, her gaze locked onto his. "We need to talk, Khalid," she said, her tone even but loaded with meaning. "All of us." Khalid's eyes flicked to Mariam, who crossed her arms and leaned back, her sharp glare cutting through the tension. "Surprised to see me?" she asked coldly. "Or did you think you could keep playing this game forever?" His usual composure faltered, and for a moment he looked like a man caught in a trap with no way out. "Mariam, this isn't what it looks like." "Don't," Amina interrupted, her voice firm. "Don't insult us with more lies. We've talked, Khalid. We know everything." Khalid's mouth opened, then closed again. He was at a loss, his carefully constructed facade crumbling in the face of their united front. "I can explain," he said finally, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Explain?" Mariam repeated bitterly, rising to her feet. "You've been lying to both of us for years, Khalid. What explanation could possibly make this okay? You've been living two lives, deceiving two families, and for what? Your ego? Your need to control everything?" Khalid's face twisted with frustration, his voice rising defensively. "It wasn't like that. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I was trying to keep things together, to protect everyone." Amina's voice cut through his excuses like a blade. "Protect us? By lying to us? By building a life with each of us based on deceit? That's not protection, Khalid. That's betrayal." Khalid turned to Amina, his desperation showing. "You don't understand, Amina. When I met you, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. You brought light into my life. I didn't know how to walk away from that." "And what about me?" Mariam interjected, her voice trembling with anger. "What about our children? You didn't think about them, did you? You were so busy chasing your fantasies that you forgot about the family you already had." Khalid took a step back, his hands raised as if to ward off their accusations. "I tried," he said weakly. "I tried to make it work, to be there for both of you." "But you failed," Amina said, her voice cold and steady. "You failed because you were selfish, Khalid. You didn't think about how your lies would destroy us." The room fell into a tense silence, the weight of Khalid's actions hanging heavy in the air. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands, finally grasping the magnitude of what he had done. "I didn't want it to end like this," he muttered, his voice barely audible. I thought I could handle it." "You thought wrong," Mariam said sharply, "and now you've lost everything." Amina watched him, her heart heavy but resolute. For all her pain, she knew this confrontation was necessary. Khalid needed to face the reality of his choices, to see the damage he had caused not just to her, but to Mariam and their children. "We deserve better," Amina said quietly, her voice breaking the silence. "Both of us. And you need to accept that you can't fix this. Not now, not ever." Khalid looked up at her, his eyes filled with regret, but there was nothing left to say. The truth had been laid bare, and no amount of words could undo the damage he had done. Amina and Mariam shared a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. They had been betrayed, but they had also found strength in each other, a strength that would carry them forward. As Khalid sat in the ruins of his double life, Amina felt a small flicker of relief. The confrontation was over, and though the pain lingered, She knew she had taken the first step toward reclaiming her life. This was the end of Khalid's control and the beginning of her freedom. The aftermath of the confrontation rippled through their lives like an earthquake, leaving no part untouched. Khalid's double life, once hidden so carefully, was now exposed, and the consequences of his actions began to unfold with devastating clarity. For Amina, the decision to confront Khalid and the truth had been necessary, but it came with its own weight. In the days following the confrontation, she found herself grappling with a mix of emotions: anger, heartbreak, and a sense of liberation she hadn't expected. The home she had once cherished now felt like a stranger's house, every corner a reminder of Khalid's betrayal. But amidst the pain, there was clarity. Amina knew she couldn't stay in the same space as Khalid, so she packed her belongings and left to stay with her parents. Her family, though shocked by the revelations, rallied around her. They offered her the support and strength she needed to begin rebuilding her life. Her mother, who had always been her quiet source of wisdom, reminded her that no storm lasts forever. "You deserve better," she said, holding Amina's hand. "This pain will pass, and you'll find yourself again." For Khalid, the consequences were far more immediate and harsh. His once pristine reputation began to crumble as whispers of his double life spread through their social circles. Mariam, furious and determined to protect her children, filed for divorce, cutting him out of her life with a resolve that left him stunned. Amina, too, made it clear that there was no path forward for them. She wanted nothing more to do with the man who had shattered her trust. Khalid's relationships with his children also suffered. Mariam, wanting to shield them from the chaos, limited his access to them, leaving him isolated and grappling with the fallout of his decisions. For the first time, he was forced to confront the reality of his actions without the buffer of lies and excuses. The weight of his choices bore down on him, and the life he had tried to juggle came crashing down entirely. The ripple effects extended beyond the immediate family. Friends and colleagues, once charmed by Khalid's polished demeanor, began to distance themselves. The man who had once seemed untouchable was now the subject of quiet judgment and pity. Khalid, once so confident and in control, found himself utterly alone. Meanwhile, Amina began to find solace in small victories. Each day away from Khalid brought her a step closer to rediscovering herself. She threw herself into new routines, finding strength in her family's unwavering support and the quiet satisfaction of rebuilding her life on her terms. The betrayal had scarred her, but it hadn't broken her. Slowly but surely, she started to see a future where she wasn't defined by Khalid's lies, but by her resilience and determination to move forward. The ripple effects of Khalid's betrayal were undeniable, but for Amina, they also brought an unexpected opportunity, a chance to rewrite her story and reclaim her happiness, one step at a time. Amina sat by the window of her childhood home, gazing out at the quiet street as the evening sun bathed everything in a golden glow. The air was still, but her mind was anything but. It had been weeks since she had walked away from the life she thought was hers, and in the solitude of this moment she allowed herself to reflect on everything that had happened. She thought about the woman she had been before Khalid came into her life, hopeful, trusting, full of dreams. That version of herself felt like a distant memory now, almost like someone else entirely. But as she looked closer, she realized that parts of that woman still lived within her. She hadn't lost herself completely. Instead, she had grown in ways she never expected. The pain of Khalid's betrayal had been overwhelming, almost unbearable at times. But through that pain, she had discovered a strength she never knew she had. She had faced the truth head-on, even when it shattered her world, and she had survived. More than that, she had chosen herself over the lies, over the betrayal, over the empty promises, and in doing so, she had reclaimed her power. Amina thought about the confrontation, about Mariam, about the bond they had formed in the unlikeliest of circumstances. It wasn't the kind of connection she had ever imagined, but it had been a lifeline in her darkest hours. They had both been victims of Khalid's deception, but they had emerged stronger, more resolute. Amina realized that even in the midst of pain, there was the potential for growth, for solidarity, for new beginnings. She smiled faintly, the first genuine smile she had allowed herself in a long time. Her journey wasn't over, there were still scars to heal, still moments of doubt and sadness. But she knew now that she was capable of moving forward, of building a life that wasn't defined by someone else's choices. She was free to dream again, to hope, to rediscover the woman she was always meant to be. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Amina felt a quiet sense of peace. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was hers to walk. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she believed she could make it. Khalid's betrayal had broken her heart, but it hadn't broken her spirit. She was still standing, and that was enough. For now, that was everything. Amina stood at the edge of a new chapter in her life, her heart lighter than it had been in months. The sun rose in the distance, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, a fitting metaphor for her own journey, a dawn after a long dark night. The pain of the past hadn't disappeared, but it had shaped her, made her stronger, and taught her to value herself in ways she never had before. With her family's unwavering support, Amina had started taking steps toward independence. She enrolled in a course to hone her skills, determined to carve out a life on her own terms. Each day brought small victories, a new friend, a moment of laughter, or the satisfaction of achieving something she once thought was out of reach. The memories of Khalid's betrayal no longer defined her. They were a part of her story, yes, but not the whole story. She was more than the woman who had been lied to. She was the woman who had faced her pain, confronted her fears, and chosen to rise above it all. As she stood in the garden of her family's home, the soft breeze brushing against her face, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope. The world was wide and full of possibilities, and for the first time, Amina was ready to embrace it. She wasn't looking for anyone to complete her, she was learning to be whole on her own. She glanced down at the small journal in her hands, its pages filled with her thoughts, dreams, and plans for the future. It was a reminder of how far she had come, and a promise to herself of how far she would go. Amina smiled, not because her journey had been easy, but because she had survived it, grown through it, and emerged stronger. "This is just the beginning," she whispered to herself, her voice steady and full of conviction. The camera pans out, capturing the warmth of her smile as she takes her first steps toward a new beginning. Amina's story wasn't just about betrayal or heartbreak. It was about resilience, rediscovery, and the unshakable strength of a woman who refused to let her circumstances define her. And as the scene fades to black, one thing is clear: Amina's future is hers to shape, and she is ready to make it extraordinary.